Welcome back to our channel. The world stage has been incredibly active recently, with numerous significant events unfolding across the globe. From shifting political landscapes to volatile economic indicators, there's a lot to unpack. Today, we're diving deep into a critical question. What unfolds when the planet's most dominant economy, the United States, experiences a significant downturn? It's often said that when America sneezes, the world catches a cold. But what if it's more serious, like the flu? If the U.S. economy were to genuinely crash, the repercussions could trigger a global domino effect, potentially leading to the collapse of entire nations. Stay with us as we explore this complex scenario, examining the potential fallout and identifying the countries most exposed. We'll delve into the historical data, current economic dependencies, and expert analyses to provide a comprehensive picture. Remember, we'll summarize the key takeaways and offer our conclusions at the very end of the video, so make sure you stick around. Before we proceed, if you find this analysis insightful, please support our channel by hitting the like button and subscribing. Your support is crucial for us to continue producing in-depth content like this. Also, let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. It's always fascinating to see our global audience reach. Now, let's get started. Imagine the sheer scale of the economic turmoil that would ensue following a major U.S. recession. The interconnectedness of the global economy means that even countries appearing stable and resilient on the surface could find themselves precariously balanced on the edge of disaster. The shockwaves wouldn't discriminate. They would ripple outwards, impacting nations far and wide, irrespective of their geographical location or political alliances. Some countries, due to their unique economic structures and deep ties to the U.S., are particularly vulnerable. We're about to reveal which 6 nations stand most at risk. Nations that could be utterly devastated if the American economy takes a significant hit. Some of the names on this list might seem obvious, given their well-known trade relationships, but others might genuinely surprise you, highlighting the often unseen threads that bind the global financial system together. Prepare yourself as we dissect the vulnerabilities of these nations, exploring the specific mechanisms through which a U.S. downturn could trigger catastrophic consequences for them. Please ensure you watch this video through to the conclusion, as we will be summarizing the crucial findings and offering our final thoughts on this potential global crisis. Let's begin our examination with Mexico, America's southern neighbor. One might initially assume that geographic proximity and a shared border would somehow cushion Mexico from the severest impacts of a U.S. economic collapse. After all, Mexico possesses its own substantial and diverse economy, seemingly independent in many respects. However, this perception overlooks the profound and intricate economic entanglement between the two nations. The reality is that Mexico's economic health is deeply intertwined with the performance of the American economy, perhaps far more than many realize. Consider this staggering statistic. Approximately 80% of Mexico's total exports are destined for the United States market. That's 4/5 of their export economy reliant on a single trading partner. Think about the implications of that figure for a moment. A vast array of goods, including automobiles, sophisticated electronics, and essential agricultural products, flow continuously across the border to meet the demands of American consumers. This trade relationship forms a cornerstone of Mexico's economic activity, supporting countless jobs and industries within the country. Now, envision a scenario where this immense American consumer demand suddenly evaporates due to a severe U.S. recession. The consequences for Mexico would be immediate and far-reaching. It wouldn't merely be a slowdown. It could potentially trigger a complete economic collapse. The ripple effects would be felt almost instantaneously across various sectors. Mexico's largest industries, heavily geared towards serving the U.S. market, would face an unprecedented crisis. The agricultural sector, for instance, relies heavily on exporting fruits, vegetables, and grains north of the border. A sudden drop in demand for these products would be disastrous for Mexican farmers, many of whom would struggle to remain financially afloat. This would inevitably lead to a sharp increase in the unemployment rate, destabilizing communities that depend heavily on this cross-border trade for their livelihoods. Entire regions could be left economically devastated, pushing a significant portion of the population deeper into poverty. But the vulnerability doesn't end with trade. Mexico has also become increasingly dependent on remittances, money sent home by Mexican workers employed in the United States. These remittances constitute a vital lifeline for countless families, providing essential funds for basic necessities like food, housing, and health care. When the U.S. economy falters, wages stagnate, and job opportunities shrink, leading to a decline in the amount of money workers can send back home. For many Mexican families, this reduction in income would mean the loss of critical financial support, potentially plunging them into dire circumstances. Putting all these factors together, the overwhelming reliance on U.S. exports and the critical importance of remittances paints a stark picture. If the United States were to fall into a deep recession, Mexico's economy could spiral downwards rapidly. A drastic drop in exports, combined with rising unemployment, a weakening currency, and reduced remittances, would create a perfect storm, potentially sending the country into a profound and debilitating financial crisis. Could Mexico truly survive economically independent of U.S. trade and remittances? Honestly, given the current depth of integration, it's incredibly difficult to envision. The reality is that Mexico's economic structure is so tightly bound to its northern neighbor that a U.S. recession could cause its own economy to crumble under the weight. Now, let's shift our focus northward to Canada, America's closest geographical and economic ally. Similar to Mexico, one might assume that Canada, with its highly developed social system, abundant natural resources, and status as a G7 nation, would possess a degree of insulation from U.S. economic woes. It has its own robust internal market and diverse trade relationships beyond the United States. However, despite these strengths, Canada's economic destiny remains extraordinarily linked to the happenings south of its border. The intricate tapestry of trade and investment between the two nations makes Canada extremely vulnerable to fluctuations in the U.S. economy. The United States is, by a significant margin, Canada's largest trading partner. An astonishing 75%, or 3/4, of all Canadian exports find their way into the U.S. market. This encompasses a vast range of goods, from crucial energy resources like oil and natural gas, to manufactured products such as machinery and vehicles. The sheer volume of this trade underscores the depth of economic integration. If the U.S. economy were to experience a major downturn, the shockwaves would reverberate through Canada almost immediately, impacting numerous key sectors. Let's break down the potential consequences. A slowdown in the U.S. economy would inevitably mean reduced demand for Canadian products. This impact would be particularly acute in industries like the energy sector. Canada is one of the world's top oil producers, and a substantial portion of its oil exports flows directly to the United States. If the U.S. economy shrinks, energy consumption typically declines, leading to lower demand and potentially plummeting oil prices. This scenario would directly strike at the heart of Canada's oil industry, centered largely in provinces like Alberta. The repercussions wouldn't be confined to oil companies alone. They would trigger a devastating chain reaction. Job losses in the energy sector and related industries would mount, contributing to higher unemployment rates. Housing markets in energy-dependent cities like Calgary and Edmonton, which often boom during periods of high oil prices, could face significant downturns. The financial strain would ripple through the broader economy, affecting businesses and households alike. Furthermore, Canada's banking and financial systems are closely interwoven with those of the United States. A recession south of the border could easily trigger massive instability within these sectors. Reduced economic activity and trade would put immense pressure on Canadian businesses, potentially leading to widespread layoffs and even closures. This would fuel further job losses and could contribute to social unrest as citizens grapple with economic hardship. While Canada boasts a strong social safety net designed to support citizens during difficult times, the sheer magnitude of an economic collapse originating from its largest trading partner could overwhelm even the most well-established systems. If people begin losing jobs, homes, and savings on a large scale, the pressure on public services and government finances would skyrocket. It's not beyond the realm of possibility to imagine a full-blown crisis unfolding, with the Canadian government scrambling to stabilize the economy while millions of its citizens struggle to make ends meet. In essence, Canada's economic survival is profoundly tethered to the health of the U.S. economy. The relationship, while beneficial in prosperous times, becomes a source of significant vulnerability during downturns. Should the U.S. fall into recession, Canada could find itself facing not just an economic slowdown, but a potential financial catastrophe. Could Canada truly weather such a storm without the robust demand from the U.S.? Given the 75% export dependence, it seems highly unlikely. The intricate economic ties mean that Canada's economy is deeply, almost inextricably, at risk if America stumbles. Let's move across the Pacific to South Korea, an economic powerhouse renowned for its technological prowess and global industrial giants. Home to internationally recognized brands like Samsung and Hyundai, South Korea projects an image of advanced industrial strength and innovation. One might perceive its sophisticated economy as being relatively shielded from a potential U.S. recession, given its global reach and technological leadership. However, the underlying reality reveals a significant dependence on the American market that makes it surprisingly vulnerable. Despite its technological achievements, South Korea's economy is heavily reliant on exports, and the United States remains a crucial destination for these goods. In the year 2023, a notable 14% of South Korea's gross domestic product originated directly from exports to the U.S. While this percentage might seem lower than Mexico's or Canada's, it represents a substantial portion of economic activity, particularly concentrated in high-value sectors. A significant part of this export value comes from technology products, especially semiconductors and consumer electronics. South Korea is a dominant force in the global semiconductor market, supplying critical components to major American tech companies, including industry leaders like Apple and Intel. These chips are fundamental to a vast range of products consumed in the U.S. If the United States enters a recession, consumer and business spending on technology typically contracts sharply. American tech companies would likely respond by cutting their budgets and reducing orders for components. This reduced demand would directly impact South Korea's semiconductor industry, a cornerstone of its modern economy, leading to potential production cuts, reduced investment, and job losses in this vital sector. The vulnerability extends beyond just semiconductors. The broader electronics market, encompassing everything from smartphones to home appliances manufactured by South Korean firms, would also suffer from diminished U.S. consumer demand. Furthermore, South Korea's significant automotive industry, led by companies like Hyundai and Kia, relies considerably on sales in the American market. A U.S. recession leading to a drop in consumer spending would inevitably result in fewer car sales, directly hurting these major South Korean automakers and their extensive supply chains. The cumulative effect of reduced demand across these key sectors, semiconductors, electronics, and automobiles, would trigger a broader economic slowdown throughout South Korea. Manufacturing output would decline, export revenues would fall, and unemployment could rise significantly. With major industries struggling, the overall economy could quickly spiral into a crisis. Consumer confidence within South Korea would likely erode, further dampening domestic spending and exacerbating the downturn. The country's dependence on American demand for its primary export goods creates a critical vulnerability. A domino effect initiated by a U.S. recession could undermine economic stability, potentially leading to widespread financial hardship and testing the resilience of South Korean society. Could South Korea's economy, despite its technological sophistication, endure the shock of losing the U.S. as a primary export market? Given that 14% of its GDP is directly tied to these exports, and considering the concentration in highly sensitive sectors like tech and automotive, the impact would be severe. The reliance on the U.S. market makes South Korea highly vulnerable, and a collapse in U.S. trade could send its economy into a dangerous freefall, threatening years of economic progress. Now, let's turn our attention to South America's largest economy, Brazil. As a major player on the global stage and a member of the BRICS group of emerging economies, Brazil possesses significant economic scale and vast natural resources. It might appear, on the surface, to have the capacity to withstand a global recession better than some smaller, more specialized economies. However, a closer look reveals underlying vulnerabilities. particularly in its dependence on commodity exports and its relationship with the global economy, which is heavily influenced by the United States. Brazil's economy is significantly exposed through its reliance on exporting raw materials and agricultural products. A huge portion of Brazil's exports, exceeding 20%, is shipped to the United States. Furthermore, Brazil is deeply integrated into the global commodity markets, selling products like soybeans, iron ore, and oil worldwide. The prices and demand for these commodities are heavily influenced by the overall health of the global economy, which is, in turn, significantly affected by the performance of the U.S. economy. Therefore, what happens if the U.S. enters a recession? The immediate effect would be a likely drop in demand for Brazilian commodities. American businesses and consumers would cut back on purchases, and a U.S.-led global slowdown would reduce worldwide demand for raw materials. This decline in demand would likely lead to falling prices for key Brazilian exports like soybeans, iron ore, and oil. For Brazil's economy, which relies heavily on these exports, the impact would be substantial and negative. Consider the agricultural sector. Soybeans and other crops are vital exports. If U.S. businesses reduce purchases or global demand slackens due to a recession, Brazilian farmers would face major financial strain, impacting rural economies and potentially increasing poverty. Similarly, a drop in global oil prices, often accompanying recessions, would directly hit Brazil's significant oil export revenues. This decline in export earnings would put immense pressure on the Brazilian economy. The government is already grappling with a high level of national debt. A major drop in export revenues could make it incredibly difficult, perhaps even impossible, for the government to service this existing debt. This situation would likely trigger higher inflation as the value of the Brazilian real weakens, making imports more expensive and eroding the purchasing power of ordinary citizens. A weakening currency and rising inflation could further destabilize the country's financial system and push the nation deeper into debt, creating a vicious cycle. Beyond the direct economic impacts, Brazil is already facing significant social challenges, including considerable income inequality, persistent poverty, and social unrest in certain areas. A major economic downturn sparked by a U.S. recession could severely exacerbate these existing problems. Rising unemployment, particularly in agricultural and commodity-producing regions, coupled with increased poverty and the government's reduced capacity to fund social programs due to falling revenues, could fuel widespread social discontent. This instability could potentially push the country towards a full-blown crisis, challenging political stability and hindering recovery efforts. Brazil's dependence on commodity exports, its existing debt burden, and underlying social tensions make it particularly vulnerable to the shockwaves of a U.S. recession. A collapse in commodity prices, combined with a rising debt burden, presents a precarious situation. Could Brazil recover quickly from such a shock? Given its fragile economic state and potential for political instability, the path to recovery would be incredibly challenging. A U.S. recession could make Brazil's already tough situation significantly worse, potentially unraveling economic progress and intensifying social divisions. Let's examine the situation in Saudi Arabia, a nation whose economy has historically been synonymous with oil. While the kingdom has embarked on ambitious diversification initiatives under its Vision 2030 plan, aiming to develop sectors like technology, tourism, and entertainment through massive projects like NEOM, the fundamental truth remains: oil is still the undisputed backbone of its economy. This deep reliance on a single commodity makes Saudi Arabia exceptionally vulnerable to global economic shifts, particularly those triggered by a downturn in the United States. The health of the U.S. economy has a profound influence on global energy markets. A U.S. recession typically leads to a significant reduction in global oil demand as industrial activity slows and transportation decreases. This drop in demand inevitably puts downward pressure on oil prices. For Saudi Arabia, whose government finances are overwhelmingly dependent on oil revenues, the consequences of sustained low oil prices are severe. If a U.S. recession were to significantly depress global oil demand and prices, Saudi Arabia's finances would be placed in jeopardy. Oil prices could potentially plummet, drastically reducing the income the kingdom relies upon to fund its government, social programs, and ambitious development projects. This wouldn't just be a minor budget adjustment. It could trigger a severe financial crisis. With massive unemployment already a concern, particularly among the youth, and significant government spending required to maintain social stability and fund public sector jobs, a sharp drop in oil revenue would be catastrophic. Cuts to government spending would likely become necessary, potentially impacting subsidies, social welfare programs, and public employment, measures that are crucial for maintaining the social contract and citizen satisfaction. Furthermore, the kingdom's massive infrastructure projects, central to its diversification strategy, rely heavily on oil revenues for funding. Projects like NEOM require colossal investment. A sustained period of low oil prices could force these projects to be scaled back, or even halted, undermining the long-term goals of economic diversification and potentially leading to further economic stagnation. What's even more concerning is the potential for political instability. The legitimacy and stability of the Saudi government are partly built upon its ability to distribute oil wealth and provide economic prosperity to its citizens. If oil money dries up, the government may struggle to keep the population satisfied. This could lead to increased social tension and potential unrest, challenging the existing political order. The kingdom's ability to manage such a crisis without destabilizing the social fabric would be tested like never before. While Saudi Arabia possesses significant financial reserves built up during periods of high oil prices, a prolonged global recession and persistently low oil prices could deplete these reserves faster than anticipated, leaving the country in a highly vulnerable position. Therefore, if the U.S. enters a recession and global oil demand drops significantly, Saudi Arabia could be facing more than just an economic downturn. It might be staring down a full-blown crisis encompassing economic hardship, social tension, and political uncertainty. The country's heavy reliance on oil makes it incredibly susceptible to the shockwaves of a global recession initiated by the U.S., and the fallout could be devastating for its economic future and internal stability. Finally, let's delve into the vulnerability of China, the world's second-largest economy. While China has experienced decades of rapid growth and has diversified its economy significantly in recent years, developing a massive internal market and expanding its global trade relationships, it remains profoundly connected to and reliant upon the global economic system, particularly the United States. Its manufacturing sector, the engine of its past growth, is still heavily dependent on exports, making it highly sensitive to shifts in global demand, especially from American consumers. The United States is a major destination for Chinese manufactured goods. A U.S. recession would inevitably lead to reduced American consumer spending and lower demand for products made in China, ranging from electronics and textiles to furniture and toys. This reduction in demand could lead to widespread factory closures and massive layoffs, particularly in coastal manufacturing hubs that are heavily export-oriented. The resulting unemployment could ripple across the Chinese economy, causing severe slowdowns in key sectors like electronics, textiles, and automotive manufacturing, which rely significantly on exports. This wouldn't just be about exports, however. China's rapid growth has been fueled, in part, by massive borrowing, leading to an escalating debt crisis involving corporations, local governments, and the troubled real estate sector. This high level of internal debt makes the economy fragile. If a U.S. recession causes global markets to contract and demand for Chinese exports to fall, it could become much harder for Chinese entities to manage their debt obligations. Foreign investment, which has played a role in China's development, might also pull back during a global downturn, further straining the financial system. With less money flowing in from exports and potentially reduced access to international capital markets, China might struggle to pay off loans. This could trigger a domestic financial crisis, potentially leading to defaults and instability within its banking system, further exacerbating the country's economic instability and slowing down growth. Furthermore, the social fabric in China could be severely tested. Rising unemployment rates, particularly in manufacturing-dependent regions, combined with financial hardship, could lead to significant public discontent. The Chinese government's ability to maintain social stability, often linked to delivering continuous economic growth and improving living standards, could be threatened. Growing calls for political or economic reform might emerge as citizens face job losses and financial insecurity, potentially pushing China into a period of heightened uncertainty and internal tension. As the government grapples with a mounting economic crisis, managing potential civil unrest could become increasingly difficult, making a recovery even more challenging. In short, China's reliance on U.S. demand for its exports, its substantial internal debt load, and the potential for a slowdown in global trade leave it vulnerable. A U.S. recession could have catastrophic effects, potentially halting factory production, causing mass layoffs, triggering a financial crisis linked to its debt burden, and testing social and political stability. While China has demonstrated resilience in the past, the combination of these factors in the face of a severe U.S. downturn presents an unprecedented challenge. So, as we've explored, the interconnected nature of the modern global economy means that a significant downturn in the United States wouldn't occur in isolation. The repercussions would be far-reaching, potentially destabilizing nations across continents. We've examined 6 countries: Mexico, Canada, South Korea, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, and China, each with unique vulnerabilities, but all significantly exposed to the economic health of the U.S. For Mexico and Canada, the extreme dependence on U.S. trade, coupled with factors like remittances for Mexico and oil reliance for Canada, creates a high degree of risk. South Korea's technological strength is undercut by its reliance on U.S. markets for high-value exports like semiconductors and cars. Brazil faces peril due to its dependence on commodity exports, sensitive to global demand, and its existing high debt levels. Saudi Arabia's vast oil wealth becomes a liability if global demand plummets, threatening government finances and stability. And China, despite its economic scale, faces risks from its export reliance, massive internal debt, and the potential for social unrest if growth falters. The domino effect is a genuine concern. A crisis starting in the U.S. could trigger financial instability, currency devaluations, rising unemployment, social unrest, and political challenges in these and potentially other nations. While diversification efforts are underway in many of these countries, the deep-seated economic ties to the U.S. make a rapid decoupling incredibly difficult, if not impossible, in the short term. The potential for a synchronized global recession sparked by a U.S. crash remains a sobering possibility, highlighting the fragile balances within our interconnected world. Thank you for joining us for this analysis. We hope this exploration has provided valuable insights into the complex dynamics of the global economy. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more content, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Where are you watching from, and which country's vulnerability concerns you the most? Until next time, stay informed.